On September 1, 1969, a 27-year-old military captain named Muammar Gaddafi led a group of young Libyan army officers against King Idrissa in a bloodless coup d'etat forcing a regime change in Libya. After the king had fled the country, the Revolutionary Command Council, RCC, set up and headed by Gaddafi, abolished the monarchy and the old constitution and established the Libyan Arab Republic, with the motto freedom, socialism and unity. After coming to power, the Gaddafi government initiated a process of redirecting funds toward providing education, healthcare and housing for all. Public education in Libya became free and primary education compulsory for both sexes. Medical care became available to the public at no cost. Under Gaddafi's rulership, the per capita income in Libya rose to more than $11,000, the fifth highest in Africa. For 42 years, Gaddafi would hold the reins of power in Libya, ruling at his whims until his assassination by US NATO-backed rebels in 2011. This is the story of how the US orchestrated the assassination of one of Africa's foremost leaders in recent history. After World War II, Libya, previously a part of the Ottoman Empire, was ceded to France and the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom favored a Saudi-style monarchy in Libya under their control. This led to the emergence of the Senesi dynasty. Endorsed by the UN, the Senesi dynasty ruled Libya from independence in 1951 under King Idrissa until his ouster by Muammar Gaddafi. King Idris during his reign kept Libya in total obscurantism while promoting British economic and military interests. Despite oil reserves being discovered in 1959, 8 years after independence, the newfound wealth did not translate into benefits for the people of Libya. According to political analyst Thierry Mason, during the reign of King Idris, Libya was mired in backwardness in education, health, housing, social security, amongst others. The low literacy rates were shocking, with only 250,000 inhabitants of the 4 million people in Libya being able to read and write. While the monarchy backed by Western powers grew richer, the people of Libya became more and more impoverished, and they sought a way out of this predicament. Like in many parts of Africa at the time, the military became the focal point for effecting the desired change, since politicians were too enmeshed in corruption while serving the interests of colonial powers. This discontent with the monarchy led to the overthrow of King Idris by Muammar Gaddafi in 1969. Gaddafi, just 27 years old, proclaimed true independence by removing the dominant foreign forces from Libya. He did this by nationalizing Libya's oil sector, the main source of Libya's wealth, and ejected Western military bases stationed in Libya, while deporting Libya's Italian population. Under Colonel Gaddafi, Libya became one of the most prosperous countries on the African continent, with the highest human developmental index on the African continent. Libya under Gaddafi had a lower percentage of people living below the poverty line than the Netherlands. It had the lowest infant mortality rate and highest life expectancy in Africa. Healthcare, education, social security, and housing was guaranteed for all Libyans. But all this was not to last forever. Throughout Gaddafi's tenure, ambitious social programs were launched in the areas of education, health, housing, public works and subsidies for electricity and basic foodstuffs. These policies led to a substantial improvement in the living conditions of Libyans, from being one of the poorest countries in Africa in 1969 to being the continent's leader in its Human Development Index in 2011. In fact, the United Nations Development Programme, 2010, considered Libya a high development country in the Middle East and North Africa. This translated status meant a literacy rate of 88.4%, a life expectancy of 74.5 years, gender equality, among several other positive indicators. At the national level, Gaddafi was able to deal with two central dilemmas characteristic of Libyan society: on the one hand, the difficulty of exercising control over the tribes, and, on the other, the fragmentation of society into diverse and sometimes opposite tribal and regional groups. Gaddafi had the ability to hold together these territories with little connection to each other. Gaddafi was able to hold together about 140 tribes in the Libyan territory, each with different traditions and origins. Gaddafi, the radical strongman of Libya, had a tenuous relationship with the West. He was openly anti-imperialist and supported anti-imperialist movements around the globe, such as Nelson Mandela's African National Congress. he built alliances with the Eastern Bloc and with Fidel Castro of Cuba. At the international level, he highlighted pan-Arabism, reaching closer ties with other Arab countries to carry out common policies of rejection of Washington's policies on the Middle East and Africa. The Libyan leader worked to strengthen ties with neighboring countries such as Egypt, Morocco, Syria, Tunisia, Chad, among others, as well as maintaining close relations with countries like France and Russia. Gaddafi also connected with Latin American countries such as Venezuela and Cuba, which led him to cultivate an extensive network of contacts and uncomfortable influence for Europe and the US. His close association with communist and anti-imperialist forces must have been a concern for the US and its Western allies. Despite receiving extensive aid and technical assistance from the Soviet Union and its allies, Gaddafi retained close ties to pro-American governments in Western Europe, largely by courting Western oil companies with promises of access to the lucrative Libyan energy sector. After the 9/11 attacks, strained relations between Libya and NATO countries were mostly normalized, and sanctions against the country relaxed, in exchange for nuclear disarmament. Throughout his reign, Gaddafi maintained a strained relationship with the U.S. In December 1981, the White House claimed Gaddafi had dispatched a hit squad to assassinate President Reagan, allegedly led by Carlos the Jackal, who had been living in Libya under Gaddafi's protection after the 1975 OPEC siege. The U.S. accused Libya of orchestrating the 1986 Berlin discotheque bombing, in which 2 American soldiers died. Reagan decided to retaliate militarily. In Operation El Dorado's Canyon, orchestrated on April 15, 1986, U.S. military planes launched a series of airstrikes on Libya, bombing military installations in various parts of the country, killing around 100 Libyans, including several civilians. One of the targets had been Gaddafi's home. While unharmed, 2 of Gaddafi's sons were injured, and he claimed that his 4-year-old adopted daughter Hannah was killed. These and other incidents formed a basis for the U.S. to see Gaddafi as an impediment to their interests in the region enough to necessitate actions to remove him from power. By a twist of fate, an event which began in Tunisia, termed the Arab Spring, provided ample opportunity for the U.S. to be rid of Gaddafi. On October 20, 2011, amid protests supported by the governments of the United States and the European Union, an armed uprising plunged the country into a civil war. The Libyan leader was then captured and brutally murdered by the rebels. The citizen protests that began in Tunisia in December 2010, Arab Spring, arrived a month later in neighboring Libya, although in a different way, as the mass and popular demonstrations that characterized Tunisia and Egypt were not replicated. In contrast, in Benghazi, where the anti-Gaddafi movement focused, Islamist groups predominated. In the true sense, there was never a mass movement on a national scale like the other countries in Libya, nor was there popular support to overthrow Gaddafi's government. However, the uprisings in Benghazi provided the pretext for the UN Security Council and NATO to intervene, launching a bombing campaign between March and October 2011 that had a decisive impact on the assassination of Gaddafi. NATO's interference in the internal affairs of Libya and the overthrow of Gaddafi were not the result of a conflict between Libyans, but to a long-term regional destabilization strategy for the Middle East. The anti-Gaddafi Islamists sponsored by Western interests used the protests to create the perfect scenario for his ousting. In the conflict's early months, Gaddafi's government with its greater firepower had the advantage and victory seemed attainable. Aided by NATO air cover, the rebel militia began to change the tide. They pushed westward, defeating loyalist armies and securing control of the center of the country. Gaining the support of the Berber communities of the Nefisa Mountains, who had long been persecuted as non-Arabic speakers under Gaddafi, the NTC armies surrounded Gaddafi loyalists in several key areas of western Libya. In August, the rebels seized Tripoli, ending the last vestiges of Gaddafi's power. Without the NATO airstrikes supporting the rebels, they would not have been able to advance west, and Gaddafi's forces would have ultimately retaken control of eastern Libya. After the fall of Tripoli, only a few towns in western Libya such as Beni Walid, Sabha, and Sirte remained Gaddafi's strongholds. Gaddafi was reportedly planning to catch up with his Sabha commander Ali Khan's Tuareg forces and seek asylum in Burkina Faso. Instead, Gaddafi retreated to his hometown of Sirte, where he convened a meeting with his son Tazim and intelligence chief Abdullah Snessi, and learned that his youngest son Kamis had been killed by a NATO airstrike on August 29. In the weeks that followed, Gaddafi continued to broadcast defiant audio messages through Syria-based Array TV. On September 10, General Masoud Abdelhafiz announced the formation of the Republic of Fezzan in Sabha, where Gaddafi would be president for life. Sabha fell on September 22. Surrounding himself with bodyguards and a small entourage, including Tazim, Security Chief Mansour Dara, and Defense Minister Abu Bakr Yunus Jeb, Gaddafi continually changed residences to escape NATO and NTC shelling, devoting his days to prayer and reading the Quran. On October 20, Gaddafi recorded a farewell audio message for his family, later publicized by Al Aviv, and then broke out of Sirte's district to an adjoined civilian military convoy. At around 8:30, NATO bombers attacked, destroying at least 14 vehicles and killing at least 53 people. The convoy scattered, and Gaddafi and those closest to him fled to a nearby villa, which was shelled by rebel militia from Misrata. Fleeing to a construction site, Gaddafi and his inner cohort hid inside drainage pipes while his bodyguards battled the rebels. In the conflict, Gaddafi suffered head injuries from a grenade blast while Jabba was killed. The Misrata militia took Gaddafi prisoner, causing serious injuries as they tried to apprehend him. A video appears to picture Gaddafi being poked or stabbed in the ends with some kind of stick or knife, or possibly a bayonet. Pulled onto the front of a pickup truck, he fell off as it drove away. His semi-naked, lifeless body was then placed into an ambulance and taken to Misrata. Upon arrival, he was found to be dead. Official NTC accounts claimed that Gaddafi was caught in the crossfire and died from bullet wounds. Other eyewitness accounts claimed that rebels had fatally shot Gaddafi in the stomach. Thus Gaddafi's 42-year reign as the leader of Libya ended with his brutal assassination by rebels aided by US and its NATO allies. Years after Gaddafi's death, residents in the chaos-racked country's capital have grown to miss the longtime leader as the frustrations of daily life mount. I hate to say it, but our life was better under the previous regime, Firza Al-Nais, a 42-year-old pharmacist told AFP in 2015, referring to Gaddafi's rule. A sentiment shared by many Libyans, including those who opposed him at some point. The economically and socially stable Libya under Gaddafi is now a fragmented country, without a government, devastated by attacks, bombings, and continuous clashes, the result of NATO invasion in 2011. A conclusion that many regret supporting decades later. Gaddafi was by no means innocent. He had his bad sides as well. He invaded neighboring African countries like Chad. There was little political freedom in Libya during his reign, but Libya was politically stable and economically prosperous enough for those things to be inconsequential. NATO had no business intervening in Libya, creating a mess that may never be fixed. Gaddafi represented an important figure for anti-imperialist struggles for his position mainly against the US and the policies carried out from Washington on the Middle East. Thanks for watching. For more of such videos from Critical Historian, like, share, and subscribe.